Here's the deal. A pod chunk brought to you by Leadership Beyond Sport. My name is Laura Barnes, and today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite concepts to teach people, which is the 80-20 concept. Now, if you are familiar with the business world, if you've maybe studied economics, then you might be saying to yourself, Laura, I already know the 80-20 principle. Duh, I read about this. I have a degree in this. What are you going to teach me that I don't already know? Buckle up. The 80-20 concept or the 80-20 principle in business typically states that 80% of the work is done by 20% of the workforce. A little disproportionate, which is why we're not talking about it. Also, I'm not a business major or an econ major, so we're not going there. We're going to talk about a concept and how you can apply it to your life in terms of skill development and decision making. So the 80-20 concept is something that I created kind of in retrospect. I had a lot of situations where I left an environment, whether it was a job, a relationship, a friendship even, and looking back at it, I was like, wow, there was some definite downward trends at the end where we just were not on the same page. And that tends to happen, right? So the 80-20 concept essentially states that if 80% of whatever you're dealing with is good, you enjoy it, you're happy, you're fulfilled, you feel valued and safe, then it's worth dealing with the 20% of obnoxious, annoying BS that inevitably comes with any situation. Because here's the deal. No job that you ever have will be perfect. No relationship that you're ever in will be perfect. I know that's a hard pill to swallow, but the truth is perfection really doesn't exist. And so sometimes we get caught up in needing to make a decision. There's an immediate downside and things are going terribly, whether it's with our job, our significant other, our friendships, whatever it might be. Things are going really, really badly and you want to bail. It's a really common theme to be like, oh, I don't like conflict. So now that there's been a fight, I need to go. I need to leave right now. That might be the first fight you've ever had with your best friend of 10 years, and yet you think you need to bail immediately. So that's when I say use the 80-20 concept. The 80-20 concept is not looking at an isolated incident. Okay, it's looking at the situation as a whole. So over the course of from the beginning to where you're at now, has it been good and positive 80% of the time? If you say yeah, generally speaking, we've been at the 80-20 mark. Okay, great. Where are you now with the situation? Are you still at 80-20 and the 20 is just bigger? I don't mean bigger in terms of more of the ratio. I just mean it's just more obnoxious right now because maybe you have stress in other areas of your life that's bleeding over into this current situation that you think is causing all the stress. So if the 20% is just more obnoxious now than it typically is because maybe it's built up over time, still might be worth just sticking it out, dealing with the 20%. But if you feel like that ratio is slipping, maybe you're at, we're only 75% good right now. Okay, it might be time to assess what's going on, what's changed. Are there things that I personally can take responsibility for that I can address to shift us closer to the 80% or to shift me closer to 80% satisfaction, happiness, joy, fulfillment, whatever? If you're not sure if there is anything you can do, it's okay to just be in a holding pattern at 75% for a minute and just see what happens. Sometimes situations have a way of working themselves out, for better or for worse. And so if you start feeling like you're sliding more towards the 70%, 65, 60, maybe you land at 50%, you're like, situation's only good like half the time. I work a 40-hour work week and 20 hours of that I hate. Okay, then it might be time to really assess if this is a long-term fit for you. And I think it's important to note that, again, the 80-20 concept is best when you can apply it to the entirety of the situation, when you can take a step back, remove yourself from the emotion of the current moment or the current situation and say, okay, over the course of everything, Was it good at least 80% of the time? If it was, then it's very possible you can get back to that 80%. It just might require some extra effort. If it wasn't, if you're like, I've never actually enjoyed like 50% of the work that I do, or like 50% of the mannerisms of my significant other drive me bonkers, maybe it's time to assess and decide to go a different direction. The other thing that I want to point out is that when you look at the 80-20 principle and the 80-20 concept and you apply it to a situation in your life, this is a baseline, right? So you start with assessing the 80-20. All right, 80% of the time, yeah, this is a pretty decent situation. I'm okay with it. I'm happy with it. I feel loved. I feel valued. I feel appreciated. I feel safe. I enjoy what I do, all of those things. But then when you look at that 20%, that's the unhappiness, the discontent, you do need to assess what's happening in that 20%. If what's happening in that 20% is unhealthy, unsafe, toxic, abusive, it's okay to leave. Even if that's only 20% of the situation and you think to yourself, oh, well, that person's only an abusive alcoholic 20% of the time. That's 20% too much. Oh, well, my boss is only super critical and really mean 20% of the time. It makes me feel worthless only 20% of the time. That's 20% too much. Your value as a human being and you deserve to feel safe. You deserve to feel safe in any environment you're in. You deserve to feel valued and respected. And if you don't feel those things, you shouldn't stick around. So that is the caveat to the 80-20, is that you use the 80-20 to assess just sort of a general feel of how we're doing, right? It's just kind of a temperature check. And then you look at the 20% of what's actually happening. And I will say that in some situations, the offense that occurred that dropped you down to that, okay, we're now below 80%. Now we're at 70% or 60%. The action that brought you down to that level might be one that is unforgivable. And that's okay too. It's okay to walk away from a situation where somebody completely violates your boundaries, your values, makes you feel unsafe. And again, this is not just personal relationships. This is workplace as well. Having a coworker who harasses you is not something you should tolerate. Even if it only happens once, it should be addressed. And if it's not rectified immediately, you should feel empowered to leave. So the 80-20 concept I have used numerous times in my life. I've used it with jobs. I've used it with bugs in my face. I've used it with significant others. And it's really interesting when you look at things in retrospect. Perhaps that's a good way to start. Look at it retrospectively. Look at a situation where you left after a significant period of time and assess if 80% of what you were dealing with at the beginning was good and positive, right? It was worth being there. And then how did that shift and change towards the end of the situation before you decided to leave or when you ultimately decided to leave? When I look at previous jobs that I've had, 80% of the work was usually really enjoyable. I loved the people I worked with. I loved the work I was doing for the most part, but there's always something that you don't enjoy. There's always something that is obnoxious, annoying. It's not a good use of your time or your skill set. It's one of those things where you're like, I'm kind of overqualified to be doing this. This is not a good use of my skills or energy. It still has to be done, but it's not the thing that I enjoy doing. The best example I can give for this is working in restaurants and side work at the end of a shift. If you've ever worked in restaurants, you probably know what I mean, but sweeping the floors and counting sugar packets at the end of a long day was my least favorite activity. Not a good use of my skill set, not a good use of my time or energy, not something I enjoyed doing. However, it was a part of the job, and I had to keep that in mind. So it was a small part of the job. It was only about 20%, and I was able to tolerate that. I ultimately left restaurants for very different reasons, but that's a good example of, all right, the 80% of the job that I like, which is interacting with people, my coworkers who are phenomenal, making good money, having flexibility in my schedule. That 80% made up for the 20% of side work, bad customers, days with poor tips and no business. Like, it made up for all that because overall, I really enjoyed most of what was happening. So again, the 80-20 concept is meant to serve as a tool in your toolkit. If you struggle with making decisions, if you are not sure in a certain scenario if you should stay or if you should go, try the 80-20 concept. Try it on for size and just see how it fits. See how you feel when you assess a situation to determine if it's at least 80% positive. And if it's not, is the 20%, if it's not at least 80% positive, is there something that you can do to start getting you closer to the 80%? What are the actions that you can take? And this is a level of radical accountability, radical responsibility, saying that you are responsible for your own happiness in this world and your own satisfaction. So if the work that you're doing or the relationship that you're in doesn't bring you happiness at least 80% of the time, what can you personally do? Who can you talk to? What conversations need to be had to try to shift things a little bit? And if those things don't work, maybe it's time to assess. If you can't get closer to 80%, if you're sitting at the 50-50 mark, it's definitely time to assess the reasons for staying versus the reasons for going. I hope this is helpful. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I'd love to hear more about how you might apply something like the 80-20 concept to your life. Or if you think about it and apply it retroactively, what is the scenario that you applied it to and what's the shift that you can see? Were you at 80 or 90% at the beginning, and then as the relationship or the job or whatever it was progressed, you got closer to like the 40% happiness, and that's when you decided it's time to leave? Did you jump ship when there was one situation that was really bad, but over the course of the entire relationship, things were pretty good? How have you seen this play out? If you've seen this play out, and how do you think you might be able to apply the 80-20 concept to your life? I look forward to seeing you on the next pod chunk, and thanks so much for watching. Here's the deal.